wherever you go, there you are. You moving isn't going to remove the emotional turmoil that you're experiencing.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to How the Wise One Grows. I am really excited for today's conversation. I'm excited for all of our conversations, but this one I feel like is a very relatable one. I think it's safe to say that at some point during most people's lives, they've had like a really strong thought or desire to pack up and move somewhere new. Like I was feeling that way earlier today. And for some people, it's this like constant burning desire. And then others, I feel like it can just be this like fleeting thought that comes and grows. But I think it's really cool to lean into conversations with what happens to those people who actually do pick up and move, who act on that hunch, and what's the reality of that like. So today we get to speak with Marisol about just that. Marisol is a life coach turned therapist who works with trauma and people who want to move and have moved and made that big leap. So, whether you desire to move across the country or to a new one, Marisol has a lot of important takeaways for us today. Before we get started, let's just take a moment to land here together with 3 deep breaths. So, just take a moment to notice where your body makes its connection to the earth beneath you. Maybe soften your shoulders down the back. Take a big breath in, fill your chest, fill your belly with air. Exhale, open your mouth, let it out. Again, inhale, chest and belly expand. Exhale, let it all go. One more inhale. And exhale. And you can return to that connection to the earth beneath you as we return to this space and land here together. Thank you so much for being here, Marisol.
Thanks so much for having me here, Holly. I'm really excited to share with your audience and just kind of, share my wisdom that has come from my move abroad.
Thanks so much. Yeah, do you mind sharing briefly about your journey and your move abroad and where you're living now?
Yeah, definitely. So I will say that when I was a little girl, I like always knew I was going to move away from where I grew up. I thought I
Mm.
was going to move to New York. I went to New York as an adult and was like, yeah, no, I can never live here.
I don't think I could do it either. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Washington State. Yes, I grew up in
Okay.
Washington State. Very grounding, very earthy energy.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so what happened is pretty much like right when I graduated high school, I actually went to college at the same time and I like got my first Fortune 500 tech job. And so yeah, I through networking, that's like honestly how how most of my opportunities in my life come about. I'm a 4-6 generator. If you know what that means, you know what that means.
We're about to do an episode on the human design, so I'm glad you said that.
Amazing. Look at me. Feeling into the future. Yeah. So basically, I realized I looked around me and I didn't want anyone's life. And so I was kind of like, where can I go? And basically, I just, followed the script, right? Like I had a good job, I finished my degree. On paper, like I worked at a startup, like everything seemed to be like status quo, but I was pretty miserable. I was burnt out and I was really just like, what the hell am I doing with my life? And I was asking everyone around me what to do. But, in hindsight, I'm kind of like, well, you really wanted guidance, but as I always say now, like everyone is their own medicine and like you have the answers that you're looking for.
So, how does someone know when it's a good time and actually healthy to move versus just escapism? I think we often lean into like, I'm sick of this situation or feeling this way, so I want to go somewhere new and I think that will fix it. But I think often the case is that we go wherever we are. So those things will still be with us even when we're in a new place. So how can we tell the difference?
Yeah, I think this really comes down to intention, like really understanding what is the intention behind your move. So, when I reflect on my own personal experience, there was a lot of emotional like turmoil going on, right? Like I was in the middle of a separation, like I was literally knowing I was going to get a divorce, like the whole life that I had built, right, was basically not going to exist anymore because of decisions I was making. And while going through that and knowing that, my intention to move to Mexico was really to focus on my own healing. And I remember sitting quite vividly. I was in Puerto Escondida, Oaxaca, with my friend 3 months before my move on 10/10 in 2021. So this was like in the summertime. And I said, wouldn't it be crazy if I were to get a divorce and move to Mexico and focus solely on my healing? But here's the thing, like, granted, life gave that to me right away. Be careful what you say. But I've always held the intention of I know that I have things that I need to work on, so let me heal. And
Mm,
something that I don't talk about too much, I've realized through, re-listening to my own podcast episodes on roaming the now, is that the entire time that I've been in Mexico, I've invested in mentors, therapists, like I've had some type of support virtually so that I'm still working on the things that, if I maybe didn't have that top of mind, like would have been the things I was running away from, right? And I think that it's really important for us to recognize what is the intention behind the thing. Why am I doing this? A move abroad or even just like in general. And I think I can give you a really good tangible client example. I have a client who has to make a lot of hard decisions in their life right now around, the relationship they're in, their career, and they are avoiding making the decision.
mm,
And, they had jokingly mentioned, oh, can I just like move? Can I just like, join you wherever you are? And I'm like, here's the thing. Based on the many, many conversations that I've had with individuals on my podcast, wherever you go, there you are. Like, you moving isn't going to remove the emotional turmoil that you're experiencing. All it's going to do is I like to think of this is it's like the universe is just going to get hotter and hotter. It's going to turn up the heat.
mm. Yeah, I love that you lean into intention and support with that. I guess to me, that's the key. Like, it doesn't matter where you are, but it's the intention you have and how you choose to move through that. So, like, these emotions, these things we're experiencing aren't going to disappear. We have to learn how to work through our stuff. And for some people, like, staying in your home base when you have community and support around you, as well as like a professional to work with, that can be a great way to work on it. And then maybe it's not that you move somewhere, but you get to go visit and explore and travel. But for others, maybe that move could be a really healthy leap because it might require you to be by yourself a little bit more, to steep with the deep things that you're working through. And again, I think it's just like so important that you name that there is that support, whether it's a therapist or a coach or whatever you need to support you as you're working through that, knowing that we don't need to do it or move through it alone, especially when we're doing something as big and scary as taking a leap, moving to a new country. Travel is one of the things that helps me grow the most. And that's why this year I decided to put in some time to find the best travel rewards credit card that I could. And I ended up getting the Chase Sapphire Preferred credit card. And so far, I love it. It's got a ton of flexibility, it gives you great rewards points. And when you sign up, you get some bonus points. And I actually have a referral link in the show notes if you are interested in getting a Chase Sapphire Preferred or Sapphire Reserved credit card. It will give you and I some extra little points so that we can continue to travel and grow together. You talk about the way I've heard you describe it is the emotional evolution of an expat. So I think many of us can be caught into that romanticized Instagram version of like, I'm moving to a new country. I'm going to be like enjoying everything so much all the time. It's going to be magical. But do you mind leaning into like what it's actually like when someone does take that leap and moves to a new country? What are some of the highs and lows that they might experience? What are those phases of that evolution?
Yeah, so definitely speaking from my lens of experience, I did go through culture shock. And
Mm,
like, granted, my family, like my roots trace back to Mexico, but like Mexico, like in the US, is very different than actually being in the country. I think that's
mm-hmm.
something that I really want to point out. And I think that while it's so amazing to see the many different ways people live their lives in different countries, it can be a little challenging, right? Because it's essentially like the script that you're taught or the script that you grew up in, right, with your culture is challenged. It no longer applies. And I also would say that it really is like this deep journey of getting to know yourself because you start to notice how you react to being challenged. And that's really what moving abroad is. Like, it is exciting and it is like, like I think back to a lot of people I've talked to on my podcast. They're like, the 3 months, it's like the honeymoon phase, right? It's awesome. You're exploring all these new things. But once you get really settled into your environment, you're kind of still just with yourself. And so it is this
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to dive in deeper to get to know yourself. How are you adjusting? It really is this, I would say, deepening of relationship with yourself, at least in my experience, of like, how do I create a home within myself? So that no
Mm,
matter where I am, no matter what country I'm in, no matter what Airbnb I'm in, I feel at home within me, as well as I think another challenge is the whole concept of identity. Because essentially, who you were, like, for example, my credentials and stuff in the US, like, they don't really mean much here, you
mm-hmm.
know? And so, if you are someone who heavily identifies with that, you kind of realize, like, wow, like, your identity is so reliant based on the environment that you're in. And for me, that's kind of been like a breath of fresh air to kind of just like let go of, oh, like, I don't need to define myself by titles or roles or I have this or that. I get to define myself by my characteristics, right? What are the things that remain constant no matter where I am? What is my essence? And I feel like that's given me a lot of freedom to just be who I am in this moment. And that's really all I can do, you know?
Mm, I love that. That actually reminds me, this is not equivalent to living abroad, but like growing up, I would was the most homesick kid ever. Like I could barely go to kindergarten. I cried every day. My parents would go to the grocery store and I would cry the whole time. I had just like serious attachment issues. Couldn't do sleepovers. And this like I mean it was even hard for me like going to college. Like being away from home has always been hard. And I remember when I got into yoga and started deepening my practice and I got into journaling and I had this like morning ritual and routine, I realized that like here's home. Like I was able to then find home within myself and I was like, I take this everywhere I go. Like, I don't have to be in that place or with that person to find home. I can come back to her every single day. And, I still do those practices to this day. I'm kind of curious for you, like, is there some sort of ritual or like routine that has helped you establish home in a new place? Or has it been more of that unfolding over time of getting to know yourself more deeply and then you have her in all these spaces?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that my journey of finding home within has definitely been in phases. So the
Mm,
first phase was recognizing just the amount of trauma that I was holding in my body and
mm.
how much I was operating from a level of trauma, which was survival mode. And I was able to process a lot of that through somatic work, which is what I'm trained to do through my trauma informed facilitation.
Mhm.
So the first 4 months of that program was actually my own healing. And then we jumped into how do we facilitate this experience for others. So that was the first phase. Then I think the second phase has really been through my study of the gene keys. So I do study the gene
Mm.
keys as a
What are the
personal,
jinkies?
yeah, as I say, I want to like do the gene keys justice.
Yeah,
So I'm going to just like read what
do
is
it.
What do the gene keys mean? So, Gene Keys is essentially like a body of work by Richard Rood, and it's really about like an inner journey of inner awareness and contemplation. And what it really does is it guides you through, like, all of us have these keys, these genetic keys, right? Like certain numbers, and they have a gift, they have a shadow, and they have a city.
Mm,
And so, what we're able to do while studying this body of work is not only uncover our own shadows, but also see how it relates to like the collective experience of the shadow as well. And it's been really, really profound. And I think also what makes me realize I have home within me is that, like, I'm not an individual, I'm like part of this collective energy. And I would say that the Gene Keys is a really good way to study kind of like the shadows
mm,
of humanity as a whole without being too identified with it, because it's kind of like the
mm-hmm,
underworld. But as with everything, there's always a light and then there's always a shadow. So it's
mm-hmm,
not, you know, and I would say that because of that, journey and really studying that, and because I have these practices of, tuning into the body, knowing that, like, they call it earthing, like, walking on the earth and making that connection. Or like I do have a pretty like regular practice of going to Temazcal. It's a traditional Mexican sweat lodge. Basically go and sit in a dark room. The hut, it's like made with really hot. It's a whole experience, but for like
they
two
are
hours.
incredible. Like your teeth sweat. It is unreal.
It's quite the experience, and I think what I'm really getting at is all the things that I do to help me create a sense of home are things that really bring me into my body. I'm not running away from
Mm,
anything. Yeah.
mm-hmm. Really requiring yourself to embody that experience. Get out of
Mm-hmm.
the head and like be it, feel it, live it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. I'm very similar because I'm all air signs. I'm in my head all the time. So I think that's why, like, I'm a potter. I teach yoga. Like, these are the things that like ground me into the earth, into my body. That's how I can be here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I really love that you spoke about shadows. I think that keeps coming up right now. When this is being recorded, not when this will be released, but this is being recorded like right before the solar eclipse in Libra, which is like a big time of working with shadows. And we just did an episode 73, with a shaman on shadow work as well, like how we work with shadows. I'm curious, like with the jinkies, is there a way that you work with the shadows that come up? Or is it just about like learning to see them and hold them as a part of the whole?
Yeah. So I want to bring up something interesting just for fun that I want to share, because it actually came
Yeah.
up in a conversation with a medicine man that I had recently. He said that we are entering the age where there are actually no more shamans. Like, we're entering the age where
Mm,
everyone is their own like proprio medicina. Like
mm,
everyone is their own medicine man or medicine woman. And I just feel like the need to share that because I thought that that was really like enlightening.
yeah. Thank you.
But in the way of working with the shadows, I think what happens is shadows are basically just uncomfortable emotions, right? It's
Mm,
uncomfortable things that we experience, or uncomfortable emotions that are living inside of us. And the thing is that what I've realized is energy doesn't really like, you can't be destroyed. I'm like being brought back to this like memory when I was living in California and I bought my first sound bowl from she's like a really popular sound bowl healer, and she told me like energy cannot be like destroyed, it can only be transmuted or transformed. And so
mm,
when we're thinking about working with our shadows, it's not about like, oh, I'm, looking at this thing in me and, well, I looked at it and, to the side. It's actually beginning to build a relationship with that part of you so that you can see, oh, am I actually operating from this place in me that is actually emotionally distressed? Or am I
mm,
operating from this place in me that is empowered and embodied? Because our shadows don't go away. Like, for example, I'll give you like a big one, in the spirit of vulnerability. So, my mom
mm-hmm,
died when I was really young. Through studying my gene keys and everything, I realized my mom had this really big fear of abandonment. And I remember that when my mom was getting ready to die, like she knew she was going to die, her own, like her trauma of being abandoned was being triggered so much in her because she knew she was going to abandon her kids. That's how
Mm.
she was seeing it, perceiving it, right? But for me, like I recognize like, oh wow, like so abandonment really plays a big part in my shadow story, my unconscious body. So what do I really want this to mean for me? How do I want to recognize the ways that this fear of abandonment has either, held me back, or how has, fear of abandonment actually propelled me forward? I think with
Mm.
what when we get to this level of shadow work, um, I don't know, I don't even want to know if I call it, just when we get to this level of awareness where it's not about labeling things good or bad, we can get into a space of neutrality. We can really begin to transmute or transform those energies, those emotions that are inside of us, and know that like they're not just going to go away. um, they're always going to be with us, but we get to decide the relationship that we have with those things, and we get to
Mhm.
decide the narrative around those things moving forward.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's so important, and I don't think we talk about enough those shadows, and they are often so labeled as good or bad, or we over identify them with them, but rather they are all a part of the whole, and they all serve a purpose, and there are challenges and there are benefits to all of it. And I think we often forget about things as like, at least in my mind, I let society write the story a lot. I'm like, ooh, people will think this about that. And like, if I don't achieve this, then that means that. But the reality is, just like you said, like we can write our own narratives. We can define, like, okay, maybe I've had this shadow I've been working with for a long time, but how can I reframe my relationship with it and rewrite that story to empower me where I am today and to the directions I want to go towards and I want to work towards. Something you talked about before, and I just kind of want to like lean into this before we close, is especially as we're working with shadows and doing new things, like it's important to have support, whether it's a professional you work with or with community. When you are moving abroad, how can you start to cultivate community in a new space when there's this language of barrier? How can you find, or this language barrier, how can you cultivate support and community, even living where you are now, or if you take an adventure to somewhere new?
Yeah, so in hindsight, look for events in your community. That's actually how
Mm.
I've begun to build my community. I went to Temescal, and then I started meeting, other expats and other different types of people. Facebook groups are good too. I mean, if you can't
Mm-hmm.
have that connection in person, maybe they're in a different part of the country that you're in. You could eventually meet one day. I actually had the opportunity, someone who was a podcast guest who like turned a friend, came to visit me here in Malinalco, Mexico,
Oh,
where I
that's
live.
awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool. And so I think it's kind of like technology provides us with so many opportunities to build community and connection, but it's up to us to take it to that next level, to be in person. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think like one of the best things I ever did was right after college, I just randomly moved to Nashville with my best friend. Like I was supposed to go for a week and I stayed for 9 months. And when I was there, I really started utilizing like Meetup and just putting myself in different scenarios and exploring things that were new, creating community in a new way. And then I moved back to my hometown and I was able to like establish those patterns of like, who I am today is different from the person I was in high school. So, how can I find a home and a community that feels supportive to where I'm at right now? So, even if you're like living somewhere and you feel stuck, you don't have to completely move to find things that feel more enlivening and supportive for you. If that is what is right for you, do it. But you can also start to practice those skills where you are now or cultivate new community. And really leaning into like, oh, I've always wanted to try like this thing. What if I just go and do that and see who you meet along the way? And you can have a totally different experience even where you are. What would your advice be for someone who's out there and they just feel stuck or uncertain about change and they're scared of the unknown. Do you have any advice that you'd offer someone who's just in that space?
Yeah, if you're going through a time in your life where you're facing uncertainty or you're feeling like, what do I do next? I think what's really important is to tap into your inner wisdom. And when I say that, like, really what I mean is like tap into the wisdom of your body. Like, the
Mm,
first part of my journey to actually be able to make these big, bold moves that are kind of scary and like require a lot of faith and trust in the process was yoga. I had to get comfortable and safe in the body in order to be able to get to this point of, okay, like, I feel safe in my body, like I can be in my body and explore that. Okay, so then now what comes next? Because I think that that's actually really a key point that a lot of people don't talk about, is that like we have to be able to trust the intuitive being that our body is before
mm-hmm.
we go on to these deeper and deeper levels. Because if we don't feel safe, we end up like skipping a lot of the important parts that are like the necessary foundations. And that's why I always kind of say to everyone, like, sometimes we have to go backwards to go forwards. And so we got to go backwards and connect to that wisdom and that trust in being in our body. And then we can trust ourselves more when it comes to these like mental decisions, right? Like, am I going to move abroad? But like, here's the thing, and it's interesting because this is like the gene key of the week. um, there is no such thing as certainty. Nothing is certain. Everything is kind of
Mm-hmm.
at the flip of a coin at any moment. The only thing that is certain is like being in this moment. So my advice to anyone who's wanting to do something big outside of the box or different is just like, can you learn to trust yourself and what you're doing right now, and then build off of that, and then through those baby steps of trusting yourself right now, trying out new things, proving to yourself that you can trust that intuition, that wisdom, then like the world is your oyster.
I resonate with that so much. Thank you so much for that advice and reminding us of the wisdom that we all have and of like you can't have one without the other. So within every certainty there is doubt, and with every doubt there is certainty. And that doesn't mean that you're wrong. Just learn how to listen to your body and be in this moment and let that be your ultimate guide. If you found Marisol's wisdom supportive today, I've created a PDF that is a guide for you to use before you pick up and move. So this covers questions and support tips that she shared to help you decide if you should remain where you are and do some work, or if leaving is the right thing for you. So there's a link in the show notes that you can click to get the PDF sent straight to your inbox. Mm. Thank you so much for taking the time to have a conversation with us today. Before you go, do you mind sharing with listeners how they can support you and your work? I'll definitely have all of the links to work with you in the show notes as well.
Yeah, definitely. So right now, where I'm at in life and in this present moment, I design like custom websites for online service providers and brick and mortar businesses. And I also do provide one-on-one coaching that is trauma informed. So if you are interested in that, you can visit connectwithmarisol.com. And if you're interested in listening to my podcast, Roaming the Now, which is all about building a life and business abroad, you can do so by visiting connectwithmarisol.com. I have a link to my podcast. You can listen to it on Apple, Spotify, and it's video too on YouTube. So whatever platform is your preferred of choice, you can tap into it there. And if you are really considering moving abroad, I highly encourage listening to the podcast because we have like a diverse amount of subjects around the psychological and emotional journey of moving abroad.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'll be sure that we have all the links in the show notes for people to check out your podcast and your work. If you haven't already, you should totally join the Dream Team. The Dream Team is an amazing group of listeners who support this podcast and make it possible every month. And you can join for as little as $3 a month. You'll support the podcast, you'll get a special handwritten postcard from yours truly, and a shout out in an upcoming episode. And if you aren't able to financially support at this time, it would mean the world to me if you would consider following this podcast on your favorite streaming platform, leaving a review. They make a world of difference, and sharing an episode you love with a friend so that we can continue to learn and grow together.